Hope everybody is doing well on this particular Wednesday afternoon. It's time for another online dinner party. Got at least one guest in the house, and we'll see if others show up as well. I know that here in Durham, North Carolina, we're having some lovely weather and some great weather in the sense that it's been in the 80s. I think we might get down to the 70s later on. And of course, the evening times have been around the 50s. So definitely it has been some almost summer like weather, not quite summer like, because as we know here in North Carolina, we can get up there around the high 90s and the hundreds. As a matter of fact, I need to get in touch with the Eno and see if they're going to have me do that festival again this year that I've done for a number of years. And that's usually kind of my birthday gift to myself because it's usually around the time of the 4th of July weekend. And it usually sometimes even falls on my birthday of July 1st. And this year I'll be hitting the big 6-2. So I'll see if that birthday party, because that's what I jokingly call it, is my personal birthday party with thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in attendance and all along those lines. So we're going to see if they're going to still need me for that particular engagement, since one of my good friends has left the job of being the director in terms of the Festival. So I got to see if they still need my services, and hopefully they will, because I always enjoy doing that event on a regular basis. So we're going to reach out to them and see if they still need my services, and if so, when they want me to get on there and do that wonderful job that I love doing on that regular basis and all along those lines. I know that this weekend I'm planning to attend a Earth Day celebration, because I've not been to one of those in a few years. Won't be working it, but they're always fun to attend. And I think this one is the one that is at Central Park School here in Durham, North Carolina. So I'll be over there trying to check that on Sunday, unless work gets in the way and I'm not able to do it because of work commitments. But we'll see what happens in that regards. And like I said, the weather's been very lovely here, and definitely folks have been enjoying that. I know that some people have been going to some of the baseball games. The Durham Bulls are in season, and definitely some folks have been attending those games, as well as attending some of the college games, whether it's UNC, whether it's Duke, whether it's North Carolina Central, or some of the other folks, even North Carolina State, that are playing in the baseball. And of course, a lot of folks are getting excited about the basketball season, since we're doing the play-in right now. And after we're done over these next days or two, we'll have the 8 that'll be in there going for the championship on both sides, both the East and the West, and all along those lines. And I was glad that I looked in my mail yesterday when I came home. It was actually sitting on my front porch, and I saw that I got the shirt that I've been looking for, because as many of y'all know, I'm a Marquette grad, and definitely a proud Marquette grad. So they sent me the Shamrock shirt with the Marquette shirt logo and asked me to put that out there. So I put it out there this way, and I might wear a shirt and also put it on my body and let folks know that I was glad to have that chance to donate to the campus and to hopefully help some student that is over there. And I did see a video. As a matter of fact, I posted it on my Instagram that Shaka Smart, the basketball coach over there, was quite proud of, because not since I was in school there, and there was a gentleman who unfortunately passed away not that long ago, Mark Murata, have we had an academic All-American. I think they said that we have had 3 in the STEAM program there, and all along those lines. And by the way, I'm glad that Mark spelled his name correctly with the C and not with the K when he was playing basketball and living. His parents did that, just like my parents did as well. And I actually knew Mr. Murata because he was on the same team with Doc Rivers. And that was the time that I was at college, and Doc will see what he can do with the Milwaukee Bucks and all along those lines. But what Shaka was very proud of, and as a proud grad, I am proud as well, is that we have not one, but 2. One of them that is graduating, because he decided not to do his 5th year because he had that COVID year of eligibility. But both Stevie Mitchell, who is known as a defensive whiz kid and all along those lines, and Oso Ighodaro have been named to the academic All-American team. So that is something that us Marquette grads are very proud of. We made it to the Sweet 16 before getting knocked out by North Carolina State, just down the road from me here, and all along those lines. But it is always good to see when you've got folks that are realizing that basketball might get them what they need in life in terms of their success, but the academics is always important as well. So I was very proud to see that 2 of those athletes did quite well. And I want to say that the team on average had a very good GPA. I want to say that both Tyler Kolick and the other players that are on that team were maintaining good grade averages. And that is something that is something us alumni are very proud of, and all along those lines. So I'm bringing my first guest, that being Jim Boswell, learn a little bit about him, what he's got going on, and maybe he's got some things happening in his world on the weather side. So we'll see how things are treating him where he's at and all along those lines. Because like I said, we've been in the 80s. I've actually got to do a speaking engagement later on this evening on health and history here in Durham, North Carolina. So it'll be me, two doctors, and somebody with the Du Bois Center that's on Duke campus as well. And we'll be talking about some of the history, particularly in the African American community, and how it is going on this particular day, but also how its history impacted some of Black Wall Street, because definitely there were some prominent doctors that were part of that creation that was in the 19th century and all in that space. But definitely it'll be interesting to have that conversation, and looking forward to it in a couple of hours. So yeah, about 6:30 or 7 o'clock here on my time and everything. But how are you doing, Jim? And definitely always got to have amazing guests. And how is the weather treating you where you are at?
Well, I'm coming to you from southeast New Mexico. We're in a mountain valley with mountains around us, and the snow's beginning to melt, and we're having about 75 degrees today and sunny.
75, 75 is
Uh,
not bad. Like I said, you
Nothing to
can get
complain
around
about.
with a little bit of a sweater, maybe, but you don't need the over sweater. And I've seen some people with both sweaters and shirts and all along those lines. But this seems like that's good weather for you and all along those lines.
It is. I was glad to put my parka away for the year.
Say the
So
park is gone now for the year.
yeah, parka's gone for the year. I won't bring that out till November again. So
And
um, yeah,
I've seen
it's an interesting place. This is a place I retired to, and I looked all around, the Western United States before doing so, and I've been really happy with it. I've been here about 14 years now,
oh yeah.
and clean air, clean skies. If you're an astronomy buff, I mean, we've got all kinds of stuff like that. We have a mountain you can ski on that's 45 minutes from where I live. You can go hiking, biking, backpacking, camping. I mean, it's very outdoorsy. So, kind of a nice lifestyle.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I know that you've got this lovely book called Lifelong Fulfillment, and a lot of times people are trying to figure out if they can have a lifelong fulfillment. I know that some people are wondering if they're in the right careers for them, and then there's that always that saying that if you do what you love, you won't have to worry about it because the rewards will come. And it sounds like that might be kind of the notion of your book, and you've definitely had some great careers, everything from working in electronics to being a software engineer type, and even doing some business consulting. And of course, that career of yours in the Navy as well. So definitely tell us a little bit about this book, Lifelong Fulfillment, because I know that there are some folks that they get to a certain age, they're like, have I achieved all the goals that I want to achieve? And can I achieve more of them? Because I know some folks that are even in their
Yeah.
70s and 80s that are
Well,
still doing great things.
right. Well, Lifelong Fulfillment, the book, we launched this in March. To be quite frank, I received, as well as some dead ends that I went through. And it's taken me about 3 years to write the book and put it all together. This is a fairly factual approach to lifestyle planning. So we don't purport to be an expert on any particular solution. So if you were to say, I need transition coaching, this will have some of that certainly, and will
Mhm.
help you with that. It might help you identify authoritative sources that do that, but I don't propose to do that. What I do is I tie all the process of creating a life plan, all the prerequisites that you need to do that. And then we get you to focus on things like economics, the environment you live in, how that plays against your goals, what your personal, constraints and economics are, so that you can sit down and, without censorship, brainstorm the kind of life you want to lead. And to be frank, this is something that, seniors and juniors in college probably should be starting, because lifetime really is, it takes you a lifetime to do this.
Yeah.
The other part is, excuse me, we also don't try and ignore things that aren't our main focus. So for instance, let's just take the thing of personal economics. We try and show you how important some proficiency in that arena is for you to go do things, whether you want to be an MD down the road, whether you want to be an artist, whether you want to be a craftsperson, whatever you're choosing to do. So we try and be the springboard that allows a person to go through a process, establish who they are, what they want, identify resources, make a plan, and then act on the plan, and then provide continuous improvements and closed loop feedback to that plan as you change your plan. Because we all know things change, and we all know that we need to be able to, well, we definitely will react to change, but it'd be nice to be in better control of the change as they happen. So
definitely agree with you on that and everything. One of the things that I think I mentioned to you in the letter to you and all along those lines is that the founder of this network, or one of the two founders, Nick Palveda, is a pension attorney by trade, and he's a big proponent of fiscal literacy and financial literacy. He actually is of the opinion that we all should know the budget, the U.S. budget, and have a understanding of what the U.S. budget is, and all along those lines. So he's oftentimes talks about that on our news show and other things along those lines. And I do remember growing up, reading that book, What Color Is Your Parachute? And I'm not even sure, even though I have no kids of my own, if my two nephews even know what that book is, or if they even have a similar type book, and all along those lines. So I was just wondering your thoughts about fiscal literacy, and are we doing a good job of teaching it? And if not, what can we do to improve that?
Well, I think for many people, fiscal literacy starts with, your first checking or savings account. I don't know about other people, but I had a savings account when I was 6 years old. So my folks instilled in me a couple of things like, if you have money, you need to learn how to spend it appropriately. Also, to get money, you need to understand that generally you have to do something to do that. In my case, we didn't use allowances as children sometimes have. We actually said, well, okay, you want some money? Here's a project around the house that you can do and be paid for. So those were my initial impressions, and I'm happy my folks did that. It gave me a good slant. Well, when I went through school, like many people, I was searching for my direction, and it wasn't clearly defined until, probably my late 20s. And in the process, I learned to deal with, student loans, second jobs so that I could go to school. So to balance my capability with my vision. And when I came back out of service, I took an MBA, and that's when it all pretty much came together. A lot of finance, a lot of economics, and a clear understanding that in the business world, which I was headed for, that I needed to master that, even if it wasn't my primary thing, so to speak. I think it needs to be taught more in high school and college. I think basic economics and certain concepts are crucial. So for instance, you asked, would I talk about Pareto rule, or would I talk about the point of diminishing returns? These are financial and numeric concepts, math, that applies to all of our lives. So for instance, let me speak to Pareto. So basically the 80-20 rule that everybody knows or has heard about says that 20% of the effort you put in delivers 80% of the returns. In other words, the benefit, the money, the achievement, whatever that happens to be. The other 80% of your effort is wasted on the 20% that remains to be done. And so the Pareto rule tends to help you distinguish that if I'm going to do something, perfection is not the objective. It is to do the Pareto 20% that delivers the high 80% return. So I use Pareto as opposed to 80-20 in my book, and I describe how it's used because it's a focusing device. Every time you do something, you should be asking, okay, is this the 80% or the 20?
Mhm.
Is this the point of diminishing returns where my next dollar I put in, I'm not going to get the same return as I did before? So maybe I should be doing something totally different to improve that return. And I use the phrase return on investment. I think that's as important on a personal basis as it is in business at a corporate level, because we only have so many hours in a day. We only have so much health, mentality, energy to apply to it. We really don't have the luxury of wasting it. So these help focus the entire process. So you're never wasting time trying to perfect something. You're moving on to the next high return activity at an appropriate time because you're constantly asking yourself these things.
Yeah, that
Uh,
makes a lot of sense. I like that. And I definitely want you to go more into that. But the other thing that I know that I had mentioned that a lot of people are very much concerned about, we hear it a lot in the media. We even hear it from our politicians and a number of other folks. But you also speak quite often about the notion of trust. And I know a lot of people have lost trust in a lot of institutions, including sometimes the financial institutions as well. But as a business person, I would think that trust is the most important thing, but sometimes I wonder about that because sometimes I don't know that even our business people are doing a good job of trying to gain our trust. So I just wonder if you could speak to trust, particularly from a entrepreneurial and a business standpoint, because I do
yeah,
even, and it's not just me. I know some other people get frustrated when they go to stores and don't feel like the stores are necessarily trying to gain their trust.
right. Well, yes, I think our everyday life out there in the world has changed drastically from a point where, yes, we trusted our institutions 30, 40 years ago, I think with much greater effect than we do now. I think there's lots of different causes for that, but I do think, in life between human beings, trust has a major component. If I'm going to invest in your process or your product or your service, it will be based on trust. Yes, the numbers matter, your business plan matters, all of that. But at the end of the day, I won't be running it. You will.
Right.
So my objective is to either answer the questions I need to have answered to know I can trust you to do that. Or I've got to write a contract, 1,000,000 pages long for every contingency, anticipating, planning for failure, so to speak. I don't like planning for failure personally. I like being able to define trust.
Mhm.
So what I've noticed is, as a naive teenager, going to college and whatnot, I had a lot of good input, but not a lot of it could I go back to the source material. Was
Right.
it quantifiable? Was it a science study? Were there results there? I needed to get into college and start reading to change what I knew and what I had been trained to do into what I knew was more authoritative, more trustworthy references that I was willing to make a foundation of my life moving forward and my objectives. And admittedly, I wasn't perfect at it, but at least I knew that's what I wanted to be doing. And I've been a salesperson. I used to sell to Hewlett Packard, AT&T, Apple Computer, stuff like that when I was doing semiconductors. And one of the key components there is absolute trust. Absolute trust that they're betting their career, their individual career, they're betting their product, and sometimes they're betting their company on the high-tech solution that you're going to supply them. And they want to know for a fact that you are basically vertically integrated into their success. If they got a problem, you got a problem.
And I
And
mean, And I imagine you
Gary,
probably learned a lot about that trust. Also, I did not serve in the military, but I have friends that served in the military, and I'm actually involved with a organization that uses a talent show to do a lot of veteran advocacy work because we actually use the Apollo model and take winners up to the Apollo Theater there in New York. But the reason Captain Newborn, and yes, that is actually his first name, not his rank, because he didn't serve in the
oh,
military either. But he is a advocate of the military and is definitely a big fan of the military, even though he does address some of the injustices that veterans have had when they have come out of the service. But I imagine that that notion of trust is also important skill that you learned as a Navy person as well. Because I'm thinking that even though I didn't serve in the military, I have friends that served, including my cousin, and I do know that trust is vital within the military.
Yes, it was. It was considered a point of honor that your word was your bond, and that you're not going to lie to anybody, that you could be trusted to do your job, and other people's success and even livelihood and life depended upon you doing what you had promised to do, or what you're chartered to do. Um, I've run across recently in trying to market into the veterans community, which of course I'm a member of, being ex-Navy submarines. And what I've found is their attitude these days is we trust somebody who's been a vet, but it doesn't go beyond that. So you sort of see that reflection of, well, I trust my shipmates, but the world at large, I'm not so sure about.
Yep, I can see that and everything. Just the shipmates, but maybe not the world at large and everything. What? Because one of the things I said I was going to mention to you, and all along those lines, is how do we determine who we trust? Because a lot of times we are going to, of course, mostly trust our family, even though sometimes that can be raised in question depending on what kind of family you came from, and all in that space. I know that I definitely trust my mom and dad because I have a great deal of respect for both of them as well as for my younger brother. But not everybody has those kinds of backgrounds and everything. So I just wondering on how do we determine on who we trust and why we trust them.
Right. Well, if you look at it from, let's take it from an academic standpoint. If we grow up with whoever we happen to wind up being family to, right? We're not in control of, the level of education, empathy, objective knowledge that they bring to being parents and running a family. That would be true of us today, myself included, had I a family. And so a lot of those traditions we used to rely on family traditions moving forward generation to generation. And, these are typically what Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning behavioral psychologist, called system one brain things. They're directly tied to your emotional makeup. They're directly tied to, evolutionary psychology, which is about keeping you whole and healthy. It's about your ability to survive, flight and fright reaction, things like that. It's about your parents' notion, maybe more than your own, about what's right, wrong, or gray area, or what religion counts or doesn't count, or whatever. Well, what I found is that as an adult, I wanted more surety than that. And that goes through to the book, Lifelong Fulfillment, because we don't rely on emotion. We try not to rely on single point expertise where I'm going to get you all energized, incentivized, and motivated to do something. I'm going to give you 8 rules, but I'm not going to give you a process by which you're supposed to come back and evaluate or prioritize those rules, or look at your performance against those, or improve on it, and at what point in your life are those all appropriate. That's what I call a single point solution. And there's lots of them. There's experts out there that can solve these problems. But if you don't tie all of these disciplines together, and they're not fact-based, in other words, they're not about unfounded opinion, then how do I credit? When I can say, hey, this is a PhD, they've done research, and here's the results thereof, and I can read it, I can internalize that and say, okay, I agree or I disagree, and here's a reason why. If you tell me just based on your gut and or your emotions that certain things are right, I can't do as good an analysis. I can't bank on it quite as much. So we've driven our idea about trust into, you're looking for authoritative sources, people that are not depending upon their system one brain, they're on their system two, which is about facts. It's slower, it's more detailed, It is more comprehensive. It's something you can read and either agree to or not. In other words, it's not hidden. I don't have to take anything on faith. And I also don't have to get inspired and then subsequently frustrated because this authority has not told me how to implement it. That's what lifelong fulfillment does for a point solution, is it ties it all together. So there's some continuity. So here I can say, I know who I am and what I want from psychology. I know what my economic situation is and what my goals say I have to do from an economic standpoint to realize those goals. And what is my definition of success? Is it just a good feeling, an emotional good feeling? Or it is, hey, I wrote a plan, I set tactics in place, I did the work, and this is the results. Some of them good, some of them not so good. And I've revised and improved throughout my time doing this to where I have continuous improvement working for me. So if I have a weak spot, I'll get there ultimately, but it may not be a high priority right now today. So I can do that too in terms of prioritizing.
You mentioned something else that's a word that I know a lot of people are very big on. I try to be big on it as well, but sometimes I don't know that people understand the word, even though a lot of people use it and everything. And that is the concept of empathy. Because I sometimes think that people think they have empathy and they may not have empathy, but I definitely try to be empathetic toward many folks, including some of those that are less fortunate and all along those lines. So I just wonder if you could talk about empathy and its importance within the business community, because I do sometimes think that it is not given as much credence in the business community as it probably needs to. But I just wondering your take on the importance of empathy.
What I found with empathy, at least if I go back to when I was directly in business and either selling or marketing or whatever, what I found is, yes, I probably tried to have as good a sense of empathy for a customer's perspective as I could possibly have. And of course, I also had the same for my boss and my own company internally. And I was always looking for solutions between the two. But to be sure I knew what that empathy, whether that empathy was correct or not, I asked questions. Or I would hear them say something and then I would go back and say, okay, so what I heard you say was da, 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 da. Is that right? And I gave them a chance to verify my gut and their statement against what they really think. And so I turned empathy into fact. And I really appreciate that approach. I would go to my bosses and say, hey, we've got this opportunity. Is this something we want to pursue? I think we do. That's the way I read the situation. But are there any gotchas I don't know about? So in other words, it's converting a feeling into a verifiable truth that I can operate against. And I found that fairly effective, actually. On a personal level, yeah, I can have empathy for people. A lot of times, particularly in stressful or stressful situations, there's not necessarily a lot you can do other than say, I feel you. If there's anything I can do, please tell me, because you don't know what's going on.
You never know the other person's life. That's very true and everything. In that same line, one of the things I used to hear in sales, and I did some sales briefly when I was in college. I think I might have been selling those lovely encyclopedias, and might have even been briefly the notion of selling the vacuum cleaners, because I know there was a couple of quick sales jobs, including one for the Sherman Park News, which was a newspaper that I was writing for as well. So I know that I've dabbled every once in a while, but only dabbled in sales. And there's this notion that the customer is always right. And I don't know that that is a truism, because sometimes the customer can be wrong. So I just wanted your take on that, because I do know that that is a lifelong idiom that is oftentimes taught to restaurant owners and other business owners, that the customer is always right. And I don't know that that is always the case, but I just wanted your take on that idiom that has been out there for a number of years.
Well, it's not a bad phrase to have in mind, whether the customer is right or wrong in point of fact. But companies of the past live and die by their customer base. And we all know that to lose a customer and gain one to replace them is an extraordinarily expensive thing to do. So if you have a base of customers, you want to keep them happy because it's so much more expensive to get customers to replace them. So loyalty is a two-way street. You want them to help your business grow, to be profitable, and so forth. They want you not only for your product, but the follow-up, the warranty, the service, and all of that, and to know that you're serious about it. I don't think they necessarily want unrealistic expectations, but companies do lose track of that. There's major companies in the world today where, frankly, we're cogs in their machine. And I personally feel that way about some, and I'm personally very embarrassed that it is that way. And the ones I admire are the ones that still take care of customers, that still produce a product and introduce new products, but don't take customers for granted. Um, I think that's a real mistake that people can fall into making.
Yeah, taking that customer for granted, that can be a big mistake and everything. You mentioned that you've done this work, you've been in the Navy, and you mentioned the family. And one of the things is you said you watched a couple of the episodes, so you know that I talk about regularly is this notion of work-life balance and everything. So I was just wondering, how have you dealt with that work-life balance? Because I've got some interesting answers from different people and everything. So while you are writing this book and while you are doing your various endeavors and everything, how have you managed to survive and have a good, solid work-life balance? And what advice do you give for folks that are trying to maintain a similar like balance?
Well, it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge to everybody. Uh, we all want maybe more than we want more than we can actually sit down and eat at a single setting. Human beings are just that way. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is we get frustrated about the things that we don't get done. Yeah. So balance is a huge part of, the book and the process that we use. I personally have experienced a lot of out of balance and imbalance. So I've been successful at times. I've been horribly unsuccessful at other times, particularly on the career side. High tech is very demanding. This is not a 40-hour work week. It's more like somewhere in the 60 to 80. Mm-hmm. And, you can balance that with home, family, and all of that if everybody understands what the common goals are and the requirements that you have to all react to. So I think positioning it and being open and candid and transparent with your loved ones, your family, your relatives, your friends is the only way you can actually get that done. And there will be upsets. I mean, people will die. Your car will break. Something will upset whatever balance you put in place. So it has to have some allowance for change and buffer some of the shocks of life, because we all get them. We're going to move from one city to another because of a career. We're going to have an illness in the family. I mean, I've been through the cancer routine. At every point, you have to be able to set back and say, okay, well, we've hit a bump. We're going to have to reposition or replan and go from there. Communication is the key to all of that.
Yeah, communication is very much the key to a lot of these things and everything. And like you said, you've definitely watched a couple of the shows. So another thing that I oftentimes bring up on these shows is the notion of the inner critic. Some people call it the imposter syndrome. Different people have different names for it. And I just wondering how you have dealt with that and how you have conquered it, because that is something else that I know a lot of people are very frustrated with and trying to figure out how to deal with, because sometimes we can be our worst enemies. You've heard me, if you watch the show, say that there have been romantic situations as well as job situations that I probably could have gone for, but I was too busy having a conversation with myself and talking myself out of it. And by the time I got around to talking myself into it and found out what the status of the job or the lady was, they were both gone and all in that space. So that inner critic can be a horrible situation. So how do you deal with that inner critic, and what advice do you give to others that are facing that inner critic, whether it's in the personal side or on the business side?
Right. Well, I would say one thing, my skill sets have improved as I got older because I learned more and I internalized some of the business processes to my own personal life because I thought they were equally applicable. It's a discipline of mindset and application that comes out of business that I can use directly on what I invest in, how I buy a house. Is the car that's on the lot, is that really the price, or are we in a negotiation that I can negotiate as one party? Things like that. So I think you always do better later. I think we have some extraordinary expectations when we're young at how good we will be at everything. And that, the balance, that will just come naturally, right? No plan. I don't need a plan. What do I need a plan for? I'm just being me, right? And I'm being true to me in the process. Well, that's a kind of a naive point of thought, if you will. And yes, you may get through it with not too much upset, and it may not, may not be a problem. But let's look at what's going on. It's, what's the divorce rate on first-time marriages? It's 50%.
50%.
Second time is like, 75% of those fail. And so it's like, that kind of calls into the question, did we really sit down and have a conversation about what our life as a couple would be, our life about having kids and family, where we might live, what our coincident objectives are, and what's our separate objectives, because frequently spouses have also separate as well as joint. And can we satisfy all of those? And if so, how would we do it? Because now we're doing it as a team. Well, team planning is no different than personal planning. It's just, you got two brains involved and two sets of agendas. So you have to work through it. I found that the better job I did on that, and the more transparent and communicative I was, the results were better. If I were reticent or embarrassed or trying to give my spouse priority, it usually backfired.
Yeah. And those agendas can change as well, because one of the things that you hear, speaking of that divorce rate, is that this notion, and sometimes the religious community isn't always the biggest person on that, because they think that they are supposed to be growth and growth together. But one of the biggest reasons that you hear people saying that they are divorcing or even separated if they are dating is that they have grown apart, meaning that they have gone in a different direction. So yeah, a lot of times there isn't a notion of planning into how you will adjust if the person is going in a different directions, because that oftentimes is what I hear people, because like I said, I've never been married, but my brother was married twice and is now engaged and has been engaged for a number of years, but they're having some health concerns. So both of them, so who knows when that wedding will take place and all along those lines. But definitely I do know that in the first two, there was probably some growth that took place that neither party was expecting, and that caused the demise of those two. And I've seen it with friends as well. So definitely we can grow apart whether we want to admit that or not.
Well, I have a kind of an involved answer to that. One is that, a generation ago, we just didn't live as long as we live now. Right. And if you look at the point that, let's just say for agreement's sake that 85 is probably what it is right now in the US. And so if you say nominally 20 is the other end of that, there's plenty of time in there, more time than anybody up till now has ever had to have a relationship. And then I counterpoint it with is, at least in my life, my goals when I was 20 were terribly different than when I was 45, and then again when I was 65, right. And even now. And so what I've found is that we live such long lives. The old perception of the 30-year career, the 50-year marriage, may be somewhat obsolete because we do change, and maybe we can't negotiate the change between spouses to mutual benefit. And rather, I'm come from the school that rather sit there and make everybody miserable, including yourself, it's probably better to, have a friendly parting of the ways and get on with it than to sit there and try and fix something that may not be fixable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But
you got a lot of time here. You got more time than anybody else has ever had. So we're leading the charge. Nobody trained us how to do this. And you change, your objectives change, your goals change. When you get more mature, you think that way more maturely. When
Yeah.
you're young, you make mistakes.
No, you definitely make mistakes when you're young and everything, but you brought up something else that I hadn't thought about, and that's that notion, but it is very much true that in one part of our lives, definitely those of folks that were born in the 40s and even those of us who were born in the 60s, there was a lot of this notion of being in one job and in one job forever and a day. And yes, there are a couple of jobs that I've had for a long time, including the Cultural Arts Center that I work for and all along those lines. But there are many folks that are not spending 15, 20, sometimes not even 5 years in the same company, and they're bouncing from company to company, and in some cases even starting company to company as well,
Right.
because there's a very much of an entrepreneurial spirit. But maybe one time you decide to open a restaurant, the next minute, to your art analogy, you decide to open a art store, and we know that those can be two different types of businesses, but they might be where their heart is taking them, and all along those lines. So I just wondered if you could speak to this notion that maybe the society has changed in that sense too, because there was a time, particularly in my grandfather's age, and I would even argue probably my great grandfather's age, when everybody was on one job and they were in that job forever until they got that gold watch.
Right. Right. Well, my dad, in case of, in point, did his 30 years of federal service. So he got the benefit of that concept. Uh, I found that my interests led me more to stretch my capabilities, and that these kinds of jobs were not permanent 30-year jobs in anybody's company. So I did a lot of changes. I went from the service, I went to companies where I might spend anywhere from 5, 7 years to a couple. I did startups. I learned at each stage something new that I wanted to do, or a product I wanted to be involved with, or a process I wanted to master. And that ultimately led to where I'm, a vice president level and director level responsible person in the company. But I was building credentials all along the way. They were all interrelated. So I wasn't, the one you just mentioned seemed kind of like it was a little difficult to say the one skill set fed the other opportunity. Mine were more leveraged in that respect, in that I brought skill sets where I didn't have to relearn that at the new company, but I was learning something different. Um, and I didn't get stuck on the idea of the gold watch. In fact, famously, Jerry Sanders, who ran Advanced Micro Devices at one point, had a box of gold watches at a sales conference. And he said, if you came here to work to get the gold watch in the 30 years, come up here and get it. And he threw the box of gold watches on the stage.
Mm.
Nobody got up to get a watch. We were all there for the long haul, and we were all there for making AMD everything it could possibly be. And so it's a different thought process. It really is.
It definitely sounds like a different process. You mentioned that you had helped some startups and some other businesses as well. And I do have some friends that are in the entrepreneurial space. I've got a good friend of mine who's actually good acquaintance, I should say, who's actually the mayor of this particular city, Durham, North Carolina. And he and his wife have opened multiple restaurants because she is of Zimbabwean descent. So a lot of the restaurants are African centered food and all along those lines. And of course, he's also very much in the business of trying to maintain and run the city as well. So, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs, whether it's somebody like Leonardo Williams or just a entrepreneur in general that might be starting either a startup business or a more advanced, maybe even a franchise business? So, what advice would you give to folks that are thinking about going into the business lane?
Entrepreneurs, the vast majority of them are not dyed-in-the-wool business people. So any entrepreneur that wants a better chance of success, if he or she doesn't have those skills, they need to engage those skills. They need business plans. They need financial help. They need to understand what the Small Business Administration can do for them. They need to get certain training. Uh, Whether you're having to give away shares of the company to get this, in other words, it's an equity position, as opposed to cash outlay. That's the details of getting that help. I love entrepreneurs. They're a lot of fun, but there are certain disciplines that they need to execute better to be more successful and to sustain themselves at a fairly low level of expense early on before they mature and go public and really drive the business. And there's going to come a point where they're driving the business where they're also going to be a little bit out of their depth, because now they've got employees, they've got an HR function, they're borrowing money, they're maybe building something or leasing a new building. These are not things that entrepreneurs are trained to do. So again, smart entrepreneurs know when to ask for help. The ones that say, I will build it and they will come, I admire their I admire their inspiration. I question their ability to deliver.
Along those same kind of lines and everything.
Mark, you there?
I'm here. It's actually multitasking. It's always fun multitasking, and all in that space. If you hold on 1 second, one of the things I was curious about and wanted to hear your answers is one of the things that I know people oftentimes talk about is this notion of business plans, and you mentioned that earlier. So how important is it for people to have a business plan? Because I know some people that would say it's not as important as people sometimes think it is.
Well, Mark, as a small business consultant, business plans were front and center. I also used to offer a diagnostic for any business and would put them in the SIC code and show them who is doing better than they are already and where they might find room for improvement. Beyond that, the business plan spells out everything: how you're going to grow, what your initial timelines might be, the resources that you're going to go to venture capital or private equity for, and what it's going to take you to do the business. There's multiple ways to launch a business. Many of them are partnerships. Many of them are venture capital funded. These days you can do private equity raising. You need to understand that. And if you don't, you might accidentally set yourself up for failure. Because one of those operational issues, which you really don't want to deal with because you're the entrepreneur of the product or the service, it'll come up to bite you and could conceivably cripple your company. So I'm a pretty firm believer in it. I don't necessarily say it has to have all the academic points and positions covered, but if you went and looked at that and said, I don't have an answer for that, then that's a point of knowledge. You don't know. And that says that, okay, well, but I'll solve that in 6 months. Well, if the rest of your business plan says you'll survive for 6 months, that's okay, right? You'll get it done. It will become important enough at some point. But to blindly launch into stuff, I'm sorry, I've grown to a point where I don't think I would have done that in my younger years, and I know I wouldn't do it now.
Here. We're going to take a brief commercial break, and then I'll be back with more conversation. Hold on 1 second. Brief commercial break, and then we'll be right back and everything. So hold on 1 second once I get to my commercial break and all along those lines. So I think we'll go with this one.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today. 804-349-8600. 804-349-8600.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you. I thank you for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
It's time for Bible or Babble. Gather around for your new favorite show. If you little work, show 'em what you know. Let's go. Bible or Babble. It's Bible. Let's go. All in every saint, we gon' put you to the test. See who know that B.I.B. a little bitch. Bible or Babble. It's Bible. Let's go.
Into cars.
Welcome to Two Big Guys on Cars. I'm Thomas Hill along with Denver Wright.
You don't want to miss an episode of Two Big Guys on Cars. Your hosts, Denver Wright and Thomas Hill, enjoy cars, entertainment, cars, man caves, and did I mention cars? Denver and Thomas review interesting cars owned by you, their viewers and fans. Got an amazing automobile? They'd like to put your car on TV. Visit them online, watch their shows, and see their merch at www.twobigguys.com. That's the number 2. www.twobigguys.com.
Thank you for joining us this time. Until next time on
Two Big Guys on Cars.
Life is like a roller coaster. You never know what's coming next. Have life's events caused you to give up on yourself? You may have realized that time passes quicker than you expected, and you can no longer avoid your truth. Do you feel like giving up? In The Bounce Back, Dr. Taz explains how her life went off track, the damage it caused her mental and physical health and goals, and how she is now taking care of her needs. Get advice from Dr. Taz on how to properly care for yourself. The Bounce Back from Dr. Teresa A. Smith. Available now.
All right, that was a little bit of a commercial break and everything along those lines. Still trying to get these people guided to where I'm trying to get them to go, because that's what happens sometimes with your multitasking, as you know, as a business owner and all along those lines and everything. So trying to multitask and guide this DoorDash person into the place as well. But while I'm trying to get them situated, Jim, if you could just share a little bit about the book and give some details, and I'll be right back with a couple of more questions. But if you give them just a rundown of the book and some of the principles, and hopefully I'll get these people situated and can get back to our interview. And all if you'll do that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure thing. Well, when you look at lifelong fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life, that's the book that I've written. And what the reason for the book is that over the years that I was in career and growing up, that I found bits and pieces of information, both from educators, formal education, from my own reading, and also through the U.S. Navy, and also through most of the companies I worked for. They had what they called management training. Many of those were point solutions of great value. And I found that rather than listen to it and ignore it later, like most people did, I tried to internalize the better parts of that into my own personal life for my own personal goals. And I found that it was terribly effective. It taught me to plan. It taught me how to critically think about things. It taught me to do basic research so I could answer questions I might have, but which may not necessarily have available answers. And so 40 to 50 years down the road, I realized that as a semi-retired person, that it would be of some value to pass this along. And so it took me about 3 years. I wrote the book, and I brought into this a multidisciplinary approach. So I talk about things about our environment, like white noise. I talk about economics. I talk about the need to know a little bit about math and science. I talk about how to qualify a trusted resource. I talk about how to find out about yourself, if you haven't already, from a psychological standpoint, so that you can better understand your own internal motivations and where that might drive you from a career perspective, who it makes you compatible with, if you will, both for friends and family, and try and tie all these disparate and siloed applications together with a process that says, hey, I can brainstorm what I want to be and where I want to be so many years out, and what it will take me to get there, and what kind of resources I have to bring to bear, and what kind of sacrifices I might have to make, and what kind of things I need to figure out along the way. So continuing education becomes a very clear part of that whole thing. This process teaches us how to reach talented experts and to use their wisdom so that we are not caught reinventing it or wasting time chasing it. We define a way to identify trusted resources so that you don't have to start doing that. Much of this information is on our website, lifelongfulfillment.com, and there's a bibliography there based on where you're at in your life. There's a bibliography that's generic. Almost all of the bibliography also has aligned podcasts that cover each subject. So if you're audiovisual as opposed to sitting there reading a book, you might enjoy podcasts better. The whole point is to hand this kit of tools and processes into every individual's hands so that they can plan to enjoy and have the best life of their most wild dreams. It's not without work. It's not a foolproof. It's not a 100% solution, because new point solutions come on all the time. Some of them are great. Some of them are just okay. Some of them are inspirational, and that's nice, but it doesn't really help you move through the process as well. And so that's what we try and do, is provide that background and the backbone. In addition, we have Vision in Action Live, which is a podcast focused on this entire process. And we invite point solution experts and people who are living self-directed lives onto the podcast so that we share some perspectives of people in life doing what we're talking about, or people who have solutions that could be of real value to the audience. So in essence, that's the way it works. So conceive of this. What happens if you said to right now today, hey, I'm just not really sure about what I want, where I want to go, and so on and so forth? Well, one of the things we do is help you get through defining who you are, what you want. We help you brainstorm that. We help you deal with lack of support, the economics of that, and so on and so forth. We do ask you to suspend prior influences. In other words, your upbringing, what your teachers told you, the institutions, you want to just let that sit still so that you can focus on yourself when you're doing personality assessments, especially, and let your true self speak out. This is your one chance to do that with yourself. And it is all about you. So you're not trying to satisfy your parent, your spouse, your children. Yes, they're a factor in your reasoning, but it's really about, at the core, what do you feel? What do you want out of life? How do you define it? And there's 3 levels of happiness. You could be just plain happy. That's the middle of the Maslow's hierarchy of scale. You could be fulfilled, very near the top, or you could be what's called the rich lifestyle, which leads to real wisdom. And that's at the very top. So you decide those. Then you look at, where you may be weak. Maybe you don't understand finance that well. Maybe you don't understand economics. Maybe math is a problem for you. Well, we get you plugged into the basics of those disciplines so that you at least have a few concepts that you can work with. These help keep you focused during the process. They make you think about return on investment. They help you get through the speed bumps of life. And once you've done that, you can write a plan, you can execute the plan, you can iterate the plan, you can fix the plan. And the plan will change because you're going to change. But it's there for your entire lifelong fulfillment. Back to you, Mark. So one of the things that we think you wind up with if you follow lifelong fulfillment is at the end of it, you wind up with a self, yourself, that you really know. You really know what you want. You can now make what we call our informed choices. And by informed, I go back to the factual point, not the emotional point. And that this drives your ability to attain happiness, fulfillment, empowerment, and so forth. And so this is what the offering is all about.
Sounds amazing. Sounds like an amazing offer. I just had a moment of that kind of space that we were talking about empathy and all along those lines, because I had made a DoorDash order, getting some groceries as well as getting some food that I'll eat later. And all along those lines, unfortunately, the lady that was doing the delivery was of Spanish descent. So we were having a language dilemma. So I was trying to get her to my space and all along those lines. And she was not having an easy time of that and all along those lines, because she is definitely English is probably her second language and Spanish is probably her first language. And I don't speak much, if any, Spanish. So it was a challenge to give that to the customer is always right attitude, because I'm sure she's probably going like, I don't know what he's saying. I know he lives in Duke Manor, which is the apartment complex, but I have no idea how to get those to where he is at and all along those lines. So she was a little bit flustered, to say the least. And I was trying to guide her in and use that empathy. So I was definitely having empathy with her situation as well. So definitely we had a real life experience in empathy and sympathy and all along those lines, because it was definitely one of them cases, which I'm sure you even deal with there in New Mexico, since I know there is a heavy Spanish population there, even more heavy than it is here. So sometimes if you're getting orders, they don't always understand what you're saying if you're speaking English, if Spanish is their primary language, and all along those lines. So it was definitely an interesting experience. So sorry about that, Jim, but definitely I knew that you could handle it with all that great knowledge and everything. One of the things I hear people talking about a lot of times in general, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is this notion of resets. And I know that a number of people, yourself included, have reset their life. I know that even my dad, who is a well-known local artist here in Durham, North Carolina, he actually got involved in the art space. I mean, he probably always had an interest, but in terms of being an active artist, it was probably when he was in his 50s or 60s that he got more active. And I do know some people that have even pursued some of their hobbies and turned them into careers, like whether that's dance or whether that's business ventures. Like I mentioned, the person that with his wife did the restaurant and all along those lines. But a lot of times we don't encourage people that there might be multiple careers and multiple jobs, because to me, a job and a career are not the same. A job is something that you do sometimes just to pay the bills, and a career is something that you do because you have a passion for it. But that's just my definition. Others may not agree with that and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts about this notion of resets, because as I read your bio, I'm going like, this man has done several resets in his life. He's been a salesperson, but he's also done a multitude of things. And I'm sure that when you were doing the sales and somebody had come up to you and said, at some point in your life, when you're later in life, you're going to write a book, you probably would have looked at it and gone like, no, that's no way I'm going to write a book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, resets have been a huge piece of my life, for sure, because I realized early on I wasn't going to be able to accomplish all the things that I wanted to do in any one single company. And I also was not a service or product person where I could turn into an instant entrepreneur. Although I have what I would call the entrepreneurial spirit, otherwise I wouldn't have been willing to move as much as I did. So case in point is Silicon Valley, 1981, if you will. Pretty much if you had any capability in business and a BSW or whatever, you could pretty much go to any company and get hired. And they paid well, they incentivized well. You basically had a stake in the company because you'd had stock options and you'd had profit sharing and things like that. And I have to say that I love that business model relative to employees. I think that's a very good thing to do. But with that said, even those companies had issues about, well, you're ready to grow, but we're not ready to grow you. And so, or you've mastered this, but we're not so sure you can go master that. Well, I'm not the kind of person that, I can be negotiated with, but I don't, cotton to someone telling me I can't do something. So if they weren't willing to work with me, one of the things about Silicon Valley is it was basically open. You put yourself on the market, you go to another company, you get a 40% pay bump, and your value proposition is strong enough that nobody holds it against you. Not your prior company, not your new one, not the next one you're going to go to. And that's very atypical in the US. It was particularly atypical back in my dad's era. And I have to say, there were times when I didn't necessarily want to do it, but I would come to the realization that I'm spinning my wheels here. So, case in point, people say, how do I make more money at my company? Things like that. And you got choices there. You can sit there and hope every 3 years you get a 10% bump to cover cost of living, right? Or you can go in and harass your boss for incremental responsibilities, which he'll give you, but will he give you the commensurate title and money that goes with it? As opposed to taking a risk and going to a new company and getting a 50% pay increase, or maybe 100%. Depending upon how strong your skill sets are, those are rational thoughts. And I did it several times. And once you've done it a couple of times, you get kind of toughened up and hardened up to where this is not as scary as you might think. Starting over, yes, it's painful, but you always learn something new when you're starting over. And so, yes, I did a lot. I worked at multiple companies, HP, Advanced Micro Devices. I worked at Hitachi. I worked at Sharp. I worked at Infosys, an Indian company. And I traveled widely. I traveled Europe. I traveled the Pacific Rim to do it. And I really enjoyed it all. I learned a lot. I'm very thankful for the time and place and people that I got to work with. It was just fabulous.
And I noticed you mentioned that in one of the principles that you have, and it sounds like you've definitely been living it, is vision and action life. And I know that a lot of times people are being stagnant. You just mentioned earlier that there are a certain word that apparently you don't let it impact you, even though it impacts a lot of people. And sometimes it's a word that we need to use that we don't use enough of and everything. But it sounds to me like you will quickly turn a no into a yes and everything. But I do know that even in business, sometimes it's all right to say no, because I know that there have been times that I have been asked to do things and my resources and my capabilities in terms of the amount of time that is allowed in a day and everything might not allow it to be done, because you can only do but so much within a 24-hour day. Even though I agree with you that most entrepreneurs and most business people are working about, there is no such thing as an 8-hour day. Most of us are working anywhere from 14 to 16 hours a day and trying to get in that little thing called sleep in between all of that work and all in that space. But I just wondered the advice that you would give to folks that want to turn those no's into yes, because that's one of the things I just heard you say is that if somebody gave you a no, you were going to try to find a way to flip it to a yes.
Yeah. Well, I can live with other people's no. I don't have any problem with that. I have great respect for people that, know their limits and want to work within them. And, that's credible to me. I can trust that process. When it comes to me, I don't really focus on no so much. I focus on the Pareto priority of the things I'm trying to do, which I have said yes to, but I did it through a rational sequence. If something comes along that's an opportunity to dovetail with that without upsetting it, then I'm likely to entertain it. If it's likely to drag me away from my priority scheme, at this stage, I probably would say a polite, well, I can't do it now, maybe in the future, but if you need to do it, make a decision right away, then you should probably just proceed without me. If it's major enough, of course, I would give a fair hearing to something that would say, Jim, you need to reset your entire set of priorities because this is such an opportunity. I would listen to that. I wouldn't say yes or no without due consideration, but I certainly wouldn't turn, a deaf ear to someone who wanted to talk about something like that.
Well, speaking of deaf ears and everything, and one of the things that I've dealt with, and I'd love to hear your answers around this, is that we all have our own visions, our own things that we want to do, and all in that space, and particularly in the entrepreneurial lane. And we do know that sometimes people will try to co-opt your dreams and your visions for theirs. And I'm not saying that you can't support your friends in their endeavors and all along those lines, but I have seen some people that will sometimes want to have you dedicate your time to their vision, not thinking as to whether it fits into your own vision and all along those lines. And I'm sure you have dealt with that as well. And I was just wondering how you address that, because I'm sure that there were, even with those companies, that there might have been people that wanted you to devote a lot of your time to their vision, not thinking whether it was in alignment with your own vision.
Well, that is true, without a doubt. I tend to look for reciprocity in things. If somebody wants my help or wants something out of what I'm doing, I'm willing to talk about it. I'm not willing to sit back and play some game about, well, you want to wheedle your way around this on a no-cost basis, and I get nothing out of it. No, that's not a conversation, not a partnership. It's not a trust relationship in my view. But, if somebody wants to do that, I'm all about reciprocity. I have no problem with that. I can always find something, I think, in what other people are doing so as to create a reciprocity situation. But I would never ask anybody to do something where I'm shortchanging them. That's just not me. I either got to pay them or reciprocate in some fashion, but I'm not looking for a free ride. So.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you do have people looking for free rides and everything. I know that even in my space, in the terms of entertainment and all along those lines, that sometimes people will want the musicians to play or do an engagement, and sometimes they love using this term of you can do it for the exposure. And I'm not saying that exposure isn't a legitimate concern, but sometimes if you've been in the business for 20 to 30 years, I think you're past the exposure stage and all in that way. But definitely they will still sometimes sing that song, and they'll also sing the song about one form of art being more important than the other, because I do know that sometimes if it is a art festival, then they may not pay the musicians as much because they are feeling that the art is what is driving the festival and all along those lines. So that's one of the things that I sometimes get frustrated with, not all the time, but sometimes. So I'm with you. I believe in reciprocity, and I think that everybody should get paid their fair due. You won't be asking your doctor to give you a kind of like a friends and family plan and all along those lines. So I don't think you need to do the same with some of our creative people as well. But that's just my personal assessment.
Right. Well, I'm familiar with what you're saying. I live in an artist community town, and there's a bit of that in terms of how they see things. So it's kind of interesting. Can't say that I have a solution for it.
Like I said, it is a different type of business, and definitely there are different rules for the different businesses, and you have to learn those different rules and how to make them work for whatever you're doing and everything in that space. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but if there was somebody, not so much the entrepreneurial business, but somebody that was just wanting to go get a better sense of their finances, because you mentioned, and I also remember having I think it was a savings bond when I was young that might have been one of my grandparents had, and all along those lines, and it definitely served its purpose. I think it might have even got me some extra money when I needed it. I don't have it now and all in that space. But what advice would you give to folks that have young people in order to make them more fiscally sound in this particular era and everything. I'm thinking that my brother may still be giving my nephews an allowance, and I do remember the age of the allowance and everything.
Right.
So do you think an allowance is a good thing, or what advice would you give to folks that are wanting to get their young people engaged in being more fiscally sound?
Well, process-wise, I think the better way with young people is to reflect the way the market works, if you can. In other words, you don't get something for nothing. You don't get dollars in your pocket just for breathing.
Right.
So if you tie something to it, like, it's okay to say if you made an A on your report card, you deserve some recognition. If it's dollars, that's okay. But that's an agreement you come to so that there is a dialogue between recipient and payer, and before the fact, hopefully. One of the things I like is for people to just sit down on a blank piece of paper and say, okay, how much income have I got coming in? And income can be more than just money. It might be money. It might be reciprocal favors. It could be, used equipment. It could be any number of things. And then below that, you say, okay, what are my expenses? How much do I have to pay for my ice cream? Therefore, how many ice creams can I have before the next time I get paid, right? Or I want to go to summer camp for a week and I want to pay half of it. My folks have offered to pay the other half. Where's that money going to come from? Do I need to go wax cars to get it done? Do I need a part-time job, doing something to accomplish that goal, where I'm actually patting myself on the back at the point where I've done it, I've got the money, and I'm on the vacation. That's great return, I think. And if you take that forward, say 10 years, well, then that's something that you put in a more formalized, what the business community calls an income statement. It's income minus expenses, and then there's your net disposable worth, right? And at any point in time, a college age, young adult should know that. Now, they may know it at a gut level, but I doubt very seriously that they've written it down where it says, okay, mom's giving me this, dad's giving me this, I'm part-time jobbing at this kind of level for this kind of income. There's my net aggregate. Here's how much I got to pay so-and-so university. And here's what I got to live for, so that you actually look at the nuts and bolts of it. The parents frequently do this in the 18 to 22 category, because they are the big support system. Well, that doesn't really train me appropriately to go out on my own once I graduate, does it?
No,
So I would say the practice, even if it's rudimentary, is worth a lot.
No, I agree with you and everything. And I know that there are programs. I used to sometimes get frustrated because I would use Mint, and I know that there's Acorn and a number of others that will sometimes let you track your spending and all along those lines. And sometimes they will even show that you are spending more than you probably need to, because what is it? I think it's supposed to be I think it's a 25% rule for a rent, if I remember correctly, or something like that, and everything. And then you might find yourself spending almost that much in fast food, speaking of those college kids, and even definitely spending it in terms of entertainment, because I know a lot of times those folks that are in college are spending their money at the bar and a number of other places as well. So sometimes they see those figures, but maybe the figures don't register as much as they should. Because I know even as an adult, when I was looking at the Mint, and I think the last time I had a Mint account might have been 5 or 10 years ago, and I'm going like, wow, that's a whole lot of money that you're spending on food, and then you try to adjust it, but the adjustments don't always work as effectively as you would like them to work, because sometimes we can be stubborn in what we like to spend our money on and all in that space. So are there any kind of tools that you would recommend that people use in terms of maintaining a knowledge of their fiscal situation? And are any of these tools mentioned in your book, or do you try to stay away from those tools, be it Mint or be it some of the other ones that I know exist, and there are hundreds of them that are out there?
Actually, the book walks you through an income statement, and it actually has a form and everything that you fill out. It's basic stuff. So it's nothing anybody should, run for the hills over. It's easy enough for everyone to do. But it creates a set of disciplined questions that you have to answer. And it tells you those very things. Are you spending too much in any one area relative to what the averages are shown to be. Are you earning enough? Do you need to start working on reducing your expenses and overhead? And it walks you through all of that. Now you can go to our website, lifelongfulfillment.com. It's got Vision in Action Live podcasts that actually address these very same issues and tell you how to do it step by step. And we do it both for, the first timer, and particularly the retirees have an issue with learning to do this, because retirees don't know how to retire. There's no school for it. And frequently they're in the midst of just confusion. So this helps them at least realign the economics of their retirement, to their longevity and what their desires are and so forth. So there's plenty of tools there, and the website has most of it. Most of it's free and open to everybody, which, by the way, we run all of the book and the website. It's a nonprofit operation. We don't make profit in this at all. As an author, I don't pocket anything for the book. It all goes into outreach like this and giving people access to this, what we think is a critical mass of data and information for them to help them run their lives.
Sounds good. And like you said, I know that retirement people oftentimes will sometimes have a significant amount of money. I know that my mom was fortunate. I think my dad as well, that they've got a good amount of nest eggs that they saved, because mom was actually the first president of the Golden Leaf Foundation, which was one of the organizations created by the tobacco settlement money. So I know that she's got a pretty good windfall from that, as well as these Smith Reynolds, which he worked at before then, and Dad has definitely been a professor at the UNC. I think also did some work at Duke as well. So definitely they have some windfall, but I do know that sometimes that can even get drained, because a lot of times family members, myself included, might be needing crisis management, because sometimes crises happen and you got depend on whoever you can find to help with those crises. And sometimes those that are better off are willing to help because they are better off. So that is definitely something that I know that I've even dealt with on occasion as well. So that I'm not going to be one of those people that is afraid to ask, because like I said, if you don't ask, you won't know whether you're going to get it or not. So that's one of the things I believe is you have to ask the question before you know the answer. And if the answer is no, then you move on to the next step of whatever the solution is. But definitely you won't know until you ask the question. So I've always been not afraid to ask whether it is that situation or others. Now I might be afraid to ask on the job market, which I just admitted to it, all along those lines. So there are certain things that I am not afraid to ask, and others that I need to do a better job of. What advice, and we're winding down very shortly and everything, would you give to folks that are thinking about being authors? And because that's something else that I mentioned that you have done. You've written this book, and it's a great book. And I'm thinking, as I said earlier, that this was not on your vision board some 20 or 30 years ago, and all in that space. So if folks are thinking that they want to have something of pertinence, whether it's around finance or whether it's just a life journey, or maybe it's just a general novel that they want to put together as well, what advice would you give to folks that are thinking that they want to be authors?
Well, authorship these days is a complicated thing. If you're a person who writes a good book and it's a commercial success, or can be, then publishers will be interested. The book that I wrote is nonfiction. It's very fact-based. Some would call it dense, and it's not what publishers would consider a moneymaker. So when I asked them, were they interested, and I'm talking nonfiction publishers only, 70 of them said nothing, virtually. So you can publish independently. There's a couple of ways you can do that. There's a hybrid publisher community that will do the marketing for you, that will put it into PDF and EPUB formats, and will do most of the marketing for you if you can't do it for yourself. That comes at a steep price. 10,000 minimum, probably more like 20 to do it that way. And so you're paying for what the publisher would normally do. Then there's guys like me who have marketing background and can do a vast majority of that stuff. And so I'm totally self-published. The only help I've hired is I've got a company, Westbine, out in the central coast of California, that's been doing social marketing for about 20 years. And so He's an old friend of mine. We work together on my podcasts, my distribution, and stuff like that. So just being a plain author and that's your forte, you need to, you're going to want to be the million book seller so that you can afford to have a publisher. Or if you've got a bankroll, you can spend your bankroll to accomplish the same thing. So I think it's difficult. The number of books published now is actually slipping a little bit every year. The one that slips the most, oddly enough, is nonfiction. Fiction is still very popular. It's easy to produce, easy to publish. You can do Kindle directly with Amazon, and that's probably the simplest, easiest approach. I'm not fond of Amazon because they don't focus on nonfiction. Okay. They focus on fiction and, multiple buys. In the nonfiction space, particularly in self-help, they're out there, but they're not high sellers. The people like Dr. Lubomirsky, who talks about the How of Happiness, might have sold 10,000 copies. Wow. That's it. And she's an authority. I mean, this is her livelihood as a PhD psychologist. So different business models. So you need to think about what kind of author am I? Which path would I choose? And there's some bumps along the road in which you learn, what you're good at, what you're not, what you need to do, what you can get away with, and to be successful. Yeah. So I never thought I'd do a book, to be quite frank, but what I wanted to deliver to the public at large couldn't be done any other way. So I'm a book and I'm a podcast now.
You're a podcaster as well and everything, and definitely you've got that great podcast, so folks can check that out as well. As we're heading out the door and everything, one thing I get everybody to do on this show, as you know, because you watched a couple of these episodes, and like I said, sometimes it's a one-on-one, sometimes we get multiple guests. Today was more of the one-on-one dinner party, and all along those lines is the notion of what message that you again get to, that you would like to get to, and everything, and a message of positivity that you would like to share. And if you'll tell our audience how they can reach you, and also how they can get in touch with you either for the book or for the podcast as well, because I am definitely a fan of supporting fellow podcasters in this space, whether it's on Pod TV or just in general. So if you'll tell folks how they can reach you in any message, because we are heard on Pod TV in multiple countries and all along those lines. So any message of positivity that you would like to share with our global audience.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I would say, our focus is, everybody deserves the opportunity to live the life of their dreams. And without the tool set that we offer, it's difficult to go it alone. What a Lifelong Fulfillment does is give you the tools. They are not tools that I invented by myself. These are from experts far in advance of me, but I put them all together and connected all the dots, along with a full suite of point solution experts, people that you can trust because I've already vetted them. And you can actually get control of your life. You can live a life that's true to who you really are, and it can be reliable. It can be resilient. It can suffer the speed bumps of life and still go on. And it can deliver fulfillment and happiness, which all of us have a right to pursue, and it can be dependable for you. So I encourage everybody to go visit the website, lifelongfulfillment.com. It's got everything there, including the book. The book's a modest $12, and you can get it in any electronic format that you'd like. And you also get the rights to print a copy if you'd like to, do that. And there's podcasts there that explain bits and pieces of the overall thing. If you follow them in sequence, basically walks you through the development process of the book. You can reach me on Jim at lifelongfulfillment.com if you so choose. And I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn if you look at James Boswell there. And we'd look forward to talking to any and everyone that wants to reach out.
Well, it sounds great and everything, and we're going to get on out of the door. That is a positive message. I hope folks will get there and check out this book. I know that I'll be trying to check out the copy as well. And right now I'm going to torture Jim with a commercial that I run regularly, which is a vegan dessert. It's run by a vegan dessert company and all, and it's based in Raleigh. And every time I play this particular commercial, I'm going like, that can't be vegan. It looks too good to be vegan, and all along those lines. But it is a young lady out of Raleigh, and every time that I see this items that she has created, I'm going like, that can't be vegan, because that just doesn't seem fair for it to be vegan, and all along those lines. But hopefully I'll get Jim back on another one of our shows, whether it's this particular dinner party or some of our other shows as well. But I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, despite the little bump that I had with the DoorDash people and all along those lines. But definitely learned a lot, and hope to learn even more from Mr. Boswell, and definitely had a great conversation. I'm sure that you always get asked, because that's what I meant to ask, whether you were related to the famous Boswell that was in the acting community and all in that space.
Well, there was a James Boswell that wrote The Life of Samuel Johnson, and yes, distantly related, believe it or not. But
Okay.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. I really had a great time. Thank
Good.
you.
Glad you had a great time, and let's check out this dessert to get on out of here. But we're getting ready to get on out of here, and it's been a fun conversation, and look forward to having you back on in the not too distant future.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license, as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes, such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.